Hey, hello everyone. Today's topic is generative AI, and in particular, how a CEO is using it to boost their creativity and their efficiency. And to take me through this, I'm joined once again by Jeff Maggioncalda, who is the CEO of Coursera, one of the largest online learning platforms. And as I have you with me, Jeff, we'll talk about how you use generative AI, but it would be good to also touch on the impact of generative AI on education and platforms like Coursera.
Yeah, great, great. Nice to be here.
Yes, good to have you with me again. So I'd love to learn more about how you have implemented generative AI into your personal creative processes and daily work routines.
Great. I'm happy to share. It's interesting. My experience with generative AI actually started, a little bit later than other CEOs, I would say. It wasn't until the first week of December, one of my product members sent me a Slack and said, "You got to check this out." And they had a little sample of Chat GPT. And I asked them, I said, it's the question was, what should Coursera's product strategy be? And it was a really thoughtful answer. And I said, what were the inputs required to generate this output? And he slagged me back. He said, only the prompt that you see. And I just was in absolute disbelief. And for those of us who remember like the first moment you tried it,
Mm.
generally speaking, it's sort of a jaw-dropping moment. And so I immediately set up 2 accounts because they would time you out, and then I bought the ChatGPT Plus as soon as it came out. I could not tear myself away from it. I was absolutely mesmerized. And so I spent the whole month of December just playing with ChatGPT, which was version 3.5, and it was just a website version, right? There were no apps, and even Azure, I don't know that they had a corporate availability. So I my family was so frustrated with me. I started really pushing on it. I was an English major, and what I was fascinated by was not only the ability for ChatGPT to create language, and it does create language, right? I mean, people say, "Oh, it's just a glorified autocomplete." Well, yeah, but look what it does. I mean, it is generating words by predicting what comes next, and then, and this to me is the powerful thing, words are tokens that store meaning. And so if a computer can predict what words go together and what words logically come next, then essentially what the computer's doing is it's predicting new thoughts, new meaning, because the meaning goes with the words. And so it might not know that it's not thinking per se, but captured in its predictive ability are thoughts, including novel thoughts. So the 2 things kinda happened. I immediately was like, "Oh, at Coursera, we need to think about how this technology can create better services for our learners." That's a lot of the external stuff.
Mhm.
Then we need to think about how to use these tools internally because lots of job roles are gonna change. And by the way, ChatGPT, it was the sort of very popular and notable text-based large language model. But Midjourney and other image generation models, and we're hearing more about these and video generation models and audio generation models, they're also happening big time. So, the generative AI is not just text. We said, how might this change our business? And then I thought about how might this change my role? And, we could talk about examples, but the 2 roles that immediately were obvious to me, and again, perhaps because I'm an English major, um, was one is a writing assistant. I mean, it's a very good writing assistant. A lot of people were like, "Oh, it doesn't do search very well because sometimes it hallucinates." Well, right. I don't think it's the best. This technology is not the best thing to replace search. It's an interesting way to augment search with what we call search and summarize. But it's very good at writing. And people say, "Yeah, but it doesn't write from scratch really well. It's not super novel." I'm like, "Well, don't always ask it to write from scratch. Give it something to work with, and it can be amazing."
Mhm.
Coach it on how to write, well, how you want the tone to be, how you want the style to be. It could be amazing. So as a writing assistant, it's been incredible. And beyond that, as a thought partner, it's been extraordinary. Is it perfect? No. Is it as good as my executive team? No. Is it really, really valuable, so valuable that I talk to ChatGPT every single day? Yes. Are there certain things that you need to do to make it powerful as a thought partner? Yes, and I can show you those things as well.
Yeah, fascinating. So how has generative AI specifically impacted your approach to decision making and problem solving as a CEO? Because they are the holy grail, and people would argue how can generative AI ever help with that?
Yeah, I think that the GPT-4 versus GPT 3.5 was a major step up. Like the large language model got smarter and better. They trained it on more stuff, trained it on more data, and they did more reinforcement learning, and it produces much better results. Um, and there's going to be a 4.5. They're training 4.5 right now. So that's going to come out. I don't know when, but probably not in too far in the distance. So number one is the the underlying large language model is getting better and better. And then number two, and I'll show you this, is the context that you give it has a whole lot to do with how good the answers are. So if I don't give it any context about a decision I'm making, and I'm just like, tell me what I should do here, it'll try its best, but it's like, well, what, like if you were a human, you'd be like, well, what are you talking about? What's the issue? Who are you? Where do you work? Give me the context. And so what I'll show you is context grounding is what people call it, is fundamental to using it to give better decision. Let me show you an example. So I'll share my screen here. So first of all, a few things I think are important. Let's see here. I want to share just the slides, video file. I guess I'll do share screen. Oh, good. I can do this. Right. Here we go. Okay, so I'm sharing just this tab, right? So first of all, this is a version of ChatGPT that we build for internal use at Coursera. I use it all the time. One of the things I would tell CEOs is be really careful about what you do on. First of all, use get ChatGPT. You know, get ChatGPT Plus. It's $20 a month. You can see I have ChatGPT as an app on the homepage of my phone, and you can switch between GPT 3.5 or GPT 4. So I use 4. Buy GPT Plus, and they're just about to integrate DAL E3, which is the image generation into ChatGPT. So it could be what they call multimodal. You can put in words, you can put in pictures. It'll give you back words. It'll give you back pictures. This is going to be a huge, huge improvement. But you got to be careful about what you do in ChatGPT as an app or on the main website because you're just not really sure who's looking at that data. There's a way that you can have it erase your conversation history, but security and privacy for a CEO on decisions that matter is really important. So what you're looking at here is something called Playground. You can see it says playground.classcoursera.co. This is a private version of ChatGPT only for use by people at Coursera, and other people at Coursera do not see my conversation history. This is my own personal version of ChatGPT, and it actually uses this is Azure OpenAI services. So our company has a public key, and we have our own instance on Azure, and so whatever I type into here is truly confidential and secure. So that's point number one: is get a secure sandbox where you can interact with this. Number two is you want to be working with GPT-4. I mean, I can use GPT 3.5. It's faster, it's cheaper, but it's not that expensive. And for my own stuff, like I don't worry about the cost. Another thing here that's really valuable. So GPT-4 is like, how smart is the underlying model? This 32K is huge. This is what they call the prompt window. So when an LLM goes and does this work, it works at what's called tokens. So when they train these models, they break up words into words and word phrases, and those are called tokens. And then they sort of digitize those into numbers. But basically, the 32K means how much text can you enter into the prompt in order for it to give you an answer. And in ChatGPT and a lot of the basic services, it's not that many. You can't ask very long questions. And it turns out that this is fundamental. And the reason I'm mentioning this too is as the prompt window gets bigger, you're going to be able to give your questions a lot more context. And as the underlying large language model gets smarter, it's going to be able to do much more valuable things with that context. So like watch those two things. Watch the competency of the underlying large language model and watch the expansion of the prompt window. And both of those are going to be doing at the same time. And this thing is just going to get smarter and smarter and smarter. Okay. So I could say, you know, I am the CEO of, I could just say, you know, um, what are the most important questions um, to ask when interviewing a new, let's just put a new leader of degrees marketing, right? So I could do that and it'll give me sort of an interesting answer. It's crucial to ask question to help you. So this is a pretty general answer, right? Ask them about their experience, ask them about their leadership style. And a lot of people kind of bounce off of ChatGPT because they ask it a really basic question with no context. And they get an answer like, okay, yeah, great. Experience and background, leadership style, strategic thinking. Yeah, I knew all this. Well, one of the things too that I find is even on the generic stuff, it might not give you really novel stuff, but it's pretty good at exhaustively or fairly comprehensively saying, like, be thinking about these things. So I might have been, yeah, I knew that. I knew that. I knew this strategic thinking. Ooh, but I wasn't thinking about data driven approach. Let me think about that. So it's a good sounding board, even generically, it's a good sounding board to kind of make sure, are you thinking about the right stuff? Now, watch this. So I can put in a lot more context. Okay. So you can you can enter stuff in as what I call, and many people call uh, grounding context. Okay. So let me go to another screen. I'm going to have to switch back and forth here. Okay. So what this is, and this is really, really primitive. So, bear with me, but this is a Google document that I'm putting together. It's 323 pages. Like, what are you doing? 323 pages. These are what I call context grounding. So these are prompts that don't ask question of ChatGPT. They provide context to ChatGPT. So you can see I have context on the company. So if I go here, well, let's just jump down to it. Here's a prompt that says, consider this is what I'll show you. I'll enter this into ChatGPT. Consider the following description of Coursera's business from its 10K business section and reply, I understand Coursera's business, but do not explain. And then I have pages and pages and pages from our corporate 10K that describes Coursera. What is our business? How does it work? What are our products? Who are our customers? Who are our competitors? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And once you put this in, it sort of loads up ChatGPT with a little bit of knowledge in its brain about Coursera that might not already be in the large language model. And then, I have things like our OKRs. So here are our Q3 company objectives and key results. Now, this is not public information, obviously. So here is and we do these every quarter. And we at different levels of detail. So I have prompts that say, consider here it says, consider Coursera's Q3 OKRs and reply, I understand your Q3 OKRs, but do not explain. And when I load that in, now the large language model understands what our goals are for Q3. And then, I won't go through all of these, but I have what our organizational structure is. We have things at Coursera called playbooks, which is how we do things. How do we set team strategy? How do we structure organizations? How do we write manager reviews? How do we make decisions making this a process called the rapid model? I have our strategy in here. I have our 3-year strategy. I have other strategy reports from companies like McKinsey. I have decision-making tools on how to make decisions. So there's a lot of context prompts that I'll load in. So let me go back to that example and I'll say, here, let's load in Coursera. So here is the prompt that will tell the LLM all about Coursera. And obviously this is all public information. So any other CEO that's competing with Coursera or that, wants to know more about Coursera can load in our 10K. And I do this with companies all the time. Before I meet with a company, I'll put in the whole 10K business section, and then I'll ask GPT like, okay, what do I do? So I can say, let's do, uh, we'll put this prompt in, and you can see this is a really, really long prompt. So now I'm going to paste that context into the window, and it says, this is just a prompt to ChatGPT. Consider the following description of Coursera's business, from its business model. You see this huge prompt. Now, people might be like, why are you doing that? You're not even asking it a question. It's like, no, I'm not asking a question. I'm loading context into its brain, into the LLM. I'm weighting it. So now it understands effectively Coursera's business. So it understands Coursera's business. And I could show you other prompts. I could also load in how we interview people. I could load in the job description for this position. But even when I do this, if I come back here, now that I've entered in all this information and I say, what are the most important questions to ask when interviewing a new marketing leader for degrees? Um, and then I'll say, I am the CEO, and they are in their final round, and the team is pretty enthusiastic. I'd like, I'll say they've asked me to make 3 key points to sell them on joining Coursera. Also, I'd like a few critical questions I should ask them to make sure, you know, they'd be a good candidate. So again, you can ask a really, really basic question with no context. You'll get a pretty vanilla answer. You put a lot of context in, you be a little bit more specific about what you're really looking for. And let's see what it says. By the way, I've not done this before. This is like totally all on the fly. And some people might be like, "Oh my gosh, Jeff, you're outsourcing your whole brain to GPT." Well, if I verbatim took the answer, then fine, you're right. But I never verbatim take the answers. I think of it as talking to one of my execs, to a really smart advisor. I'm still the decision maker. I still need to, be accountable for what I decide, but it's a really good thought partner. So as the CEO, you'll want to focus on key points that emphasize Coursera's unique value proposition and ask critical questions. Of course, we know that, right? So here's the key points to sell Coursera. Mission impact. Where did it get this? It got it from that big context I put in: innovative and forward-thinking culture, a global reach and diverse workforce. Okay, that's interesting. And then critical question to ask, strategic approach, adapt to market changes. You know, um, How would you ensure Coursera stays ahead of the curve in the degrees marketing space? Cross-functional collaboration. It knows that this is a very cross-functional position. So, it gives me something to think about. I'll often say, this is all kind of interesting. I already kind of knew about that. Ooh, global, they always say innovative and forward-thinking culture. And I'll say, you know, say more about, innovative culture. What specific points might be most effective, um, if the candidate has a background coming from, I'll just say ed tech. Sorry, fintech, which is a little bit out there, but who knows? And so you talk to it, don't ask it for just one answer. Give it a lot of context, tell it what you're looking for, get an answer, and then talk to it. Say like, okay, I want to learn more about that. I want to talk about that. So then it'll give me I'll drill into one of the topics and it'll be helpful there. I'll show you one more thing and then we could talk a little bit about what I'm doing here. And so I can then drill in. I could say, I don't agree with that. I often disagree. Another thing I could do is I could say, if I want to, I could say, I was thinking that these would be my 3 key questions. What are the blind spots? What am I missing? So I often just say, you know, what are the biggest mistakes I might make in this interview, and how might I avoid them? Well, I often ask ChatGPT about what I'm not thinking, what I'm not saying. biases that I might have, and it's really good to help and challenge your thinking. Or I'll often say, "I'm thinking this. What's wrong with this point of view?" So here are some mistakes: not being well prepared. And you can say, "Well, I already knew that." And but it's like, how to avoid? Did I look at the resume? Did I look at the materials? Did I take note of what they specifically did? Talking too much? Yeah, sometimes I do that. Asking closed-ended leading questions. So, some CEOs might say, "I know all of this. There's nothing new here. I'm I'm just finding it personally to be incredibly thoughtful and fast at helping challenge and broaden my." All right, let me pause.
Very good. So you use it to help you with your thought processes and decision making, to just to bounce off ideas. Creativity is one of those things that is usually associated with human intuition and innovation. So how do you balance your personal use of generative AI while still maintaining a personal touch when it comes to your leadership style?
Yeah, well, there's leadership style and more broadly creativity. I will mention that 2 days ago, there was just an article in the Wall Street Journal that said, uh, we challenged a group of Wharton MBAs against ChatGPT to see who is most creative at generating business ideas." And then the subtitle said, "The results weren't even close." ChatGPT absolutely smoked the MBA students at work in generating ideas. So it is quite a bit of I think a misperception and perhaps misuse to think that this thing is not super creative. So I could say, I could challenge 5 people to say, um, give me 3 questions to ask in order to assess the candidate's self awareness. And now I could ask 5 people, and they'd sit there. They might come up with some pretty good ideas. But what ChatGPT can do is it could generate them much faster. So do they know what their strengths and weaknesses are? How do they handle feedback? Adapting to challenges. And I'll say, I like to ask the question, um, "How are you most misunderstood?" So this is one of my favorites for self awareness. How are you most misunderstood? What do you think of that? And then, we'll see what it says. But it can be pretty thoughtful, but Bernard also can be a insightful way to assess the question, encourage the candidate to reflect on their interactions with others and identify areas where they might need to improve their communication or clarify the intentions. It can also reveal how the candidate perceives themselves and how they navigate situations where they feel misunderstood. This is exactly what happened. This is actually a very good question. But then I can say, um, give me 10 more questions that get to the same types of, insights. So people often say, and this is true when it comes to creativity and brainstorming, a lot of it is about quantity. A lot of it is how fast and how broadly, with no judgment, can you generate a lot of ideas. And then there's the filtering part where you say, how do you filter through them? I literally with ChatGPT, I do both of those things. I go for quantity. I'm like, give me 10. And then I could just say, watch this, another 10. Maybe it can give me hundreds, and then I'll just pick the ones that I like the most. So I find that if you give it context, you say what you're looking for, and you ask for quantity, it can be really quite creative.
So beyond ChatGPT, are there any other generative AI tools you're using?
Yeah, yeah, I've been using Midjourney a lot. Midjourney. So for me in my job, the ChatGPT is I mostly use language, but I gave a keynote. I'll show you this one here. I gave a keynote at our conference, and the keynote was all about Coursera, and it's about how we can facilitate collaboration among universities and industry and business and government. So it's a lot about the ecosystem. A lot of the talk was about um, how fast things are changing and how this creates a lot of threats. People will be impacted, people will be displaced, but it also creates opportunities and opportunities to help more people get access to education and more people to use their skills to do jobs, especially working remotely. So what I did in Midjourney, in fact, what I did was I took my whole presentation, I exported it as text, I loaded it into ChatGPT, and I said to ChatGPT, "This is a keynote I'm giving. I want to create a picture that represents, that sort of illustrates the themes of this keynote. Write me a prompt to put into Midjourney, which is the package that synthesizes uh, text and then creates images." And so it gave me a prompt, and I was like, "Oh, I like that." I wanted a metaphor that really could say, "Show me something that shows change, that shows like a network." I'd like it to show kind of artificial intelligence, but I'd also like it to show neural networks, like this idea that something organic and brain neurons, but also kind of there's a technology piece to this. I wanted to show change, but I wanted to show some amount of harmony. I want it to be positive. I mean, with a long, long prompt. And this is the picture it generated. Now, you might say, "Oh, that's, I don't know what you think about." But I looked at this and I was like, wow. I mean, yeah, it looks like a tree of knowledge. There's a certain balance and a vibrance to the hues. Clearly, there's something that looks like neurons. But these bubbles here, yeah, if you actually do a neural network learning node for people that know, this looks like a map of a neural network, like a deep learning neural network. And then you can see there's organic elements as well, and there's different colors. So you can use this to generate all sorts of images. I just wanted to generate an image that captured like the theme of my talk. And most CEOs are not there, generating a lot of images. Most CEOs are not there generating sounds. Oh, I'll show you one more thing though that we've used generative AI for. I forgot about this, but this is something I've been showing quite a bit, and it'll give you a sense for where generative AI is going. So let me just see. I have to just pull up the most recent version. So when I am out there talking about generative AI, I mean, clearly you could talk about text, and that has a lot to do with thinking and writing, for me at least. You can do pictures, and that has a lot to do with illustrations. I mean, generally a little bit less relevant. But when I'm talking about kind of where generative AI is heading, and I speak to global audiences all around the world, I like to show them this video. So let me quickly just show you this video here. There is no greater path to opportunity than education. But millions of people worldwide face a language barrier that prevents them from accessing knowledge. Technology and AI will play a critical role in making the world language more equally accessible. Coursera is excited to announce that we have translated over 2,000 courses into Spanish. Today, we are translating written words. Soon, the language barrier may disappear altogether. Soon, the best instructors in the world will be able to speak the languages of everyone in the world. It's a glimpse of what that might look like. Gesundheit, von Armut zu Wohlstand und von Konflikt zu Frieden zu verwandeln. Man niet te lang de kap in tijd, si vite qu'on rap. Peu crop qu'on rap. Peu chum qu'on rap. Peu importe qui nous sommes ou où nous sommes, l'apprentissage nous donne le pouvoir de changer, de grandir et de redéfinir ce qui est possible. Por eso, la mejor educación es un derecho, no un privilegio. Por isso que o Coursera está aqui. Kami bermitra dengan institusi terbaik untuk menghadirkan pembelajaran terbaik ke seluruh penjuru dunia, بحيث يكون لأي شخص القدرة على تحويل حياته بالتعلم. Thank you. So, that's where things are heading. Let me just stop sharing here. That's where things are heading, and I think the ability to synthesize language, synthesize sounds, synthesize images, synthesize videos, it's gonna change a lot. So that's more on the presentation side. I think what's most powerful though is its ability to think, to consider things, and even more than the expression of ideas, the creation and the challenging and the shaping of ideas. I found it to be an incredible thought partner.
Yeah. So has your use of generative AI led to any breakthrough innovations, both personally and also with Coursera's product offerings?
No, I don't think so, but where I'm not sure about that is now when it really obviously depends on the stakes. If the stakes are very, very high and generative AI can help me think through it better or come up with something I didn't know that or didn't think about, then yeah, it has a bigger chance for a big breakthrough. I would say that nothing really comes to mind other than the higher the stakes of a decision, the more I invest in putting in context and talking to ChatGPT. So for a simple, I mean, look, for simple decisions, I don't bother. I just don't bother. But if it's really important and I really want to think through it, I'll say, what context does it need? And I'll spend some time with it. But here's the key thing. As the large language model gets better, when it goes from 4 to 4.5 to 5 to 6 to 7, it's going to become smarter than I am. It just will. It will be able to process information and patterns of meanings faster than I can, almost for sure. As the context window gets bigger, so from 32,000, about 20,000 words to 50,000 to 100,000 to a million to 10 million, I will have, I think, I don't know exactly when, but probably in the next year or two, I'll probably have a version of this where the large language model is 2 or 3 times smarter and it can take every piece of content I've ever written, every presentation I've ever seen, every speech I've ever given. And with that as context, it will help me think through things. So I think that these two basic things, which is how capable is the large language model and how much context does it have? To me, it is almost inevitable that it will become more capable than me at processing information and formulating decisions. Now, I always have to be the critical thinking override, and I'm the person who needs to communicate it. I mean, ChatGPT is not exactly an inspirational leader, but a lot of my cognitive work, I'm going to be taking advantage of GPT as a cognitive assistant. It's not where it is now; it's where it's going. So, if I can answer the question, do I think it will create breakthrough ideas in the next 12 months? Yeah. In the next 2 years, no doubt about it.
And
No doubt.
you encourage everyone within Coursera to use it too?
Absolutely. So a big part of what we did at Coursera, we had two big efforts. One is on the external side, we built Coach, which is an interactive tutor for our learners. We're building Course Builder, which helps our partners create content more quickly. We're doing new types of assessments so people can't chat on GPT. We're using generative AI to do the translations, which I just showed. So one big thrust was how can this technology in our business model help us deliver more value to customers? Like that was number one. And then number two is how do we all use this technology to do our jobs better, realizing this going to be different for a designer versus a customer support rep versus a CEO. To do this, we have a Slack channel where everyone's talking about it. Not everyone, but like almost the whole company's in the Slack channel talking about what are they reading, what are they doing. They're sharing the way that they're using this. We have what we call a make-a-thon. We do this every year, but we did a make AI-thon, which is like everybody we gave people 3 full days where all they did was play with this technology and then share what they learned about it to do their jobs. We have in our financial planning process, every team is putting together a description of how generative AI technology is going to change their job roles and how that might afford productivity improvements. And McKinsey estimates $4.4 trillion in productivity improvements because of the uses of this technology. And then based on what we're doing internally, we're building what we call the Generative AI Academy for companies because every company is going to have to reskill almost every employee to use this technology effectively, to create better value for customers and beat the competition and to become more productive and improve profitability. So we are also realizing that not only do we need to transform our company, but we need the content and the programmatic learning on an enterprise basis to help our customers undergo what might be the biggest digital transformation that companies have seen so far.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a leader in the online learning space, how do you envision generative AI playing a role in transforming education?
Yeah, I think there's a few things, and they're all happening simultaneously. To some degree, the first thing is students cheat. I mean, students cheat. And until there's an adjustment, and we could say you can't use ChatGPT or we're going to use ChatGPT detectors. I wouldn't bother. Oh, number one is they can be defeated pretty easily by somewhat clever students who just modify certain things. But the other thing too is ChatGPT, like Google, like calculators, in the olden days with me, like encyclopedias, it's a thinking tool. Humans have become an incredibly powerful species because of our brains and the way we create tools, and especially the way that we create tools help our brains be more effective. ChatGPT is one of the best thinking tools that's ever been created, and future versions will be better. People need to learn how to use it, and so students need to learn how to use it. And the question is, well, how do you help them learn how to use it, but not let them cheat? And I think a lot of that has to do with how do we change the way that we assess people. And so, the first big impact of changing education is letting students cheat. A next quick one is going to be creating assessment that you can't really cheat on. Now you can lock down browsers and make sure they're not using it, but they're also doing pretty neat things where the assignment is to write an essay using ChatGPT. Then watch what the student does. What prompts do they put in? What context do they give? How do they challenge it? How do they assess the factuality of the results? How do they cite it? How do they sharpen it to create a more novel perspective? I think that's a pretty basic way. And I think it's a very good way to say, yeah, here's the new assignment is
Mm.
write an essay using all the resources that are available to you. But I want to, we call it at Coursera, we call it show your work. It's not going to be so much about assessing the final output. I mean, that will be important. It's also going to be about assessing people's thinking processes, which is kind of what, if you go back to Socrates, if you look at the Oxford and Cambridge tutorial method, you look at the way people defend their dissertations, it's here's my output, right? But now let's have an interactive conversation where you challenge my thinking and I can A, show you that I know critically what I'm talking about, but B, part of your challenging my thinking is actually improving my thinking. I think that's where things are headed with respect to AI and assessments. We already have Coach, which is a personalized tutor. So another way that it's going to change education is essentially every single student 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We'll have a personal teaching assistant who will help explain things, translate things, visualize things, basically help people learn in a very personalized way. We've already launched Coach. It's it's awesome. I'd love to show you a demo. We probably don't have enough time, but you can go to Coursera and use Coach. For educators, the ability to create material that is far more tailored to students and far more interactive because it's online, it's so much easier. So we have a product called Course Builder that's now in pilot testing. This helps professors and even company learning and development specialists create courses using existing components that are tailored to the learning objectives of a specific audience. So it's going to be much more tailored, and that's really, really neat. I mentioned translations. Almost all education will be available to pretty much everybody in the world at every level of quality that they would want. And then I also mentioned Generative AI Academy. I mean, I do think that part of education too, the educational system, is the transformation of higher education, and that's going to require a lot of skilling and reskilling of professors and administrators. So we're going to have to help education institutions understand how fast this is changing and give them the tools and the skills to make that change gracefully.
Very good. And you shared lots of tips already, but can you share any other tips for both individuals and organizations that are looking to implement generative AI to bolster their own creativity?
Yeah, I would say a few things at the very top. Number one, play with it, play with it, play with it all the time. You won't really understand what this can do until you experience it, and you won't really understand the full capabilities until you use it in different ways. I mean, don't be scared of it. Play with it. But that also is very closely um, linked to you have to be thoughtful about privacy, security, ethics. If you're using this, don't provide material non-public information to public websites. Don't assume unless it's like Microsoft Azure and they're really good at GDPR and privacy and security. Don't assume that all this stuff is not being used to train things and people might be looking at it. So be really thoughtful about the way that you use it. Another thing too, especially for CEOs, is never outsource the human from the human in the loop. I shouldn't say never, but be very, very careful about putting AI in control of mission critical systems, including decision making systems. The biases, the errors, and the potential for misalignment, which is that the AI can do something different than what's in your best interest or your organization's best interest, is important. So stay in the driver's seat. So play with it, but be thoughtful and stay in the driver's seat. And then a third thing I will just say is recognize that this is moving really, really fast. So great to develop points of view on where things are today. But I would say, as many CEOs say, and I think it's a good phrase, like I have strongly held points of view. I have strong points of view, lightly held. Be ready to change your opinion about what's happening because what's happening is changing very rapidly. I often see people, it's a little bit like what happens, throughout history. A lot of people in power will take something that challenges their power and they'll say that will never happen. Whether it's the fact that, guess what? The sun doesn't rotate around the earth. That was really revolutionary for humans to accept that the earth goes around the sun, not the other way around. The printing press, the priests didn't want people to have access to written language. They wanted to be the ones who control, what people read. So people in power often are resistant to the potential for change and disruption. And I would just say there's a bias with probably almost all CEOs. I have it too, which is to say, oh, it can't really do this. It's not really creative. It's not really that smart. It doesn't generate new ideas. It's prone to hallucination. Yeah, it is. But you got to look at where this is going. And the only way to really, I think, grasp it is to use it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Any advice on how to tackle some of the ethical concerns and challenges?
Well, for us, we put together a set of generative AI principles, and we share them with our partners all the time. Let me bring that up really fast. Sorry. So in terms of tips for kind of getting your arms around the ethics of it, I mean, part of it is read what other people are doing and saying, especially thoughtful people discussing issues of ethics. Another thing that we found to be pretty important at Coursera is to have a set of guiding principles. So we have a set of principles generally across the whole company for generative AI, and we shared it with the employees, and we obviously use this and go back to it. We tell teams like, look, when you do things as managers or in your job roles, make sure it's consistent with you. We also created principles for applications that we develop with our partners, and you can see here the set of principles that we are currently operating under. And the thing that's nice about principles is they're not specific to any particular application. So they're more robust and transferable. So I'd say that CEOs should definitely put together a set of AI ethics for their whole company. And what we've also done is put together a set of guiding principles for the way that we develop applications for the outside world to use. And this is just, one example from Coursera of what we're telling our partners and our customers about what they can expect and hold us accountable to in the way that we use generative AI. But I think it is important to articulate clearly to all the audiences that are relevant. These are the stakes in the ground that we're putting that are going to bind and constrain and guide us in the way that we use and create new applications using generative AI.
Very good. How do you see the role of the CEO evolving over the next 20 years with the advancements of generative AI?
Well, it's going to be a number of things. Honestly, I think that the biggest thing is thinking about the sets of threats and opportunities facing CEOs. I mean, if we think about the role of CEO, a primary role is leader. And you say, well, what does a leader do? A leader tries to figure out, a leader of a company, like a CEO of a company, tries to figure out fundamentally what needs are customers going to have that you're going to try to address so that they want to buy your products and services? And how can you deliver those services in a way that's better than your competition, sustainably better than the way that better than your competition? And so if you think about, okay, so you try to figure out a vision for your business and how you're going to serve customers and how your company is going to operate. And then you put together a roadmap and you articulate, well, what do we need to do in order to get to that vision. And that's part of leadership, is articulating what the future might look like and aspire, an aspirational view of the future. And then ideally, you have a roadmap for how to get there. And that includes, a lot of change management and organizational structure and culture, frankly. Well, when the world is changing faster and faster, you need to be updating your vision faster and faster. And so the rate of change is going to put huge pressure on all leaders, starting with the CEO, but every C suite exec, every manager, because employees are going to be asked to change the way they work and what they're working on and who they're working with faster than ever. And change management is hard, and it's the job of leaderships to not only point in the right direction, but to support the organization in making the changes to head in that direction and to feel good about heading in that direction. So, we're clearly working with more diverse workforces from more parts of the world. They have far richer perspectives on what customers need. I think it's wonderful, but we're also working more remotely. We're working in different time zones. It's harder for managers to do that. And now you take the acceleration piece and say, and we're going to be changing faster and faster and faster with technologies that are more and more complex. It's going to be really hard to be a leader. So I would say, perhaps surprisingly, that the humanity of being a CEO is going to become more and more important, and more of the cognitive role of being a CEO is going to get more and more assistance from technology. It's being in touch with customers, being in touch with employees to facilitate that change and that inspirational leadership that really is the most important thing that a CEO can do.
Very good. That's a great way to end this. Thank you so much for sharing all of these fascinating thoughts and insights and tips with us today.
My pleasure, Bernard. Always a pleasure.
Great. And anyone who ever wants to rewatch this, simply head to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much.
Thanks.